Today on the show, we're diving into the world of economic indicators. These are the numbers that tell us how the economy is doing. Things like GDP, unemployment rates, and consumer confidence. But what do these indicators really mean? How are they calculated? And how should we interpret them? We'll break it all down for you, with the help of some experts to make sense of the numbers that shape our world. She placed the glass gently in front of him. "By the way, sir," she said softly, "it's a full house tonight." "You must be used to attention," Jonathan smirked. "When you build an empire, attention follows. Some people serve it, others earn it." The words landed heavier than he realized. Maxine simply nodded. "That's true, sir. But sometimes serving teaches more than earning ever could." He looked up sharply, but before he could respond, she had already turned and walked away. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations. Plates clinked, glasses shimmered. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, trying to shake off the strange unease that was beginning to creep in. Why had her words lingered like that? He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone like her. He glanced around. People were laughing, enjoying their meals, but he felt strangely detached. All his money, his power, yet there was a hollowness in his chest that no stake, no deal, no trophy could fill. He tried to focus on his phone again, but his reflection in the dark screen looked tired, older. For the first time in years, he noticed it. Then Maxine returned, notepad in hand. "I'll just prepare your bill, sir. It'll only take a moment." Jonathan gave a short nod. "Good. I've got places to be." She turned and walked toward the counter, her steps calm but deliberate. Jonathan didn't notice the way she paused for a moment by the printer, looking down at the bill, then reaching into her apron pocket to take out a small folded piece of paper. When Maxine came back, Jonathan was finishing his drink. She set the check neatly on the table, her expression neutral, her eyes thoughtful. "Here you go, sir. Take your time." He slid his credit card toward her without looking. "Just charge it." "Yes, sir." She took the card, hesitated for half a second, then placed something else, something small and white, beneath the bill. A folded note. Jonathan didn't see it yet. His phone buzzed again. He was too busy replying to a message about a potential merger. Maxine walked away slowly, exhaling as if she'd been holding her breath all evening. At the counter, she handed the card to the cashier, who glanced at her with curiosity. "You okay?" She nodded gently. "Yes, just needed to say something." In a different way, the cashier frowned. "You sure that's a good idea?" Maxine smiled. Sometimes the truth deserves to be heard, even if it's written on paper. Jonathan signed the receipt without looking, tucked his phone into his jacket pocket, and finally noticed the small folded note under the bill. He frowned, curious. "What's this?" The handwriting was neat but firm, the kind that came from someone used to working hard. He unfolded it slowly, expecting a message about service or a request for a tip. Instead, he read the first few words, and froze, his chest tightened. His hand stopped moving. Whatever was written there, it wasn't just words, it was something personal, something he never expected to see. He looked up, eyes searching for Maxine, but she was already gone, walking toward the kitchen with quiet dignity. That simple piece of paper, that note, would soon make one of the richest men in the world realize how truly poor he'd become inside. The restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm. The faint clinking of cutlery, the quiet hum of conversation, and the soft jazz tune playing through the speakers filled the air. But for Maxine Waters, everything felt heavier, like each sound echoed through her chest. She had just done something bold, something she'd never dared before. She had handed a billionaire a note, one that could either be ignored or change something deep inside him. She walked back toward the kitchen, her heart beating faster with every step. "Maxine, you okay?" asked Carla, another waitress. "Yeah," Maxine said softly, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." In truth, she wasn't okay. The memory of her husband, James, still haunted her every day. Years ago, he had worked for Harrington Enterprises, the very company this man, Charles Harrington, had built his fortune on. James had been one of the first employees laid off when the company decided to cut costs. Overnight, their security vanished. Bills piled up. James struggled to find work again. He tried, he really did. But the pressure, the humiliation, the endless rejections broke him. He passed away 2 years later, a heart attack brought on by stress and exhaustion, the doctor said, but Maxine knew it wasn't just his heart that stopped. It was his hope. That note she slipped to Charles wasn't written out of anger. It was written out of truth. A quiet cry from someone who had been invisible for too long. It said, "You may not remember me, Mr. Harrington, but I remember you. My husband worked for your company, James Waters. When you laid him off, we lost everything. He passed away soon after. I don't want anything from you. I just hope that one day you'll see the people behind your numbers." Back at his table, Charles Harrington stared at the folded piece of paper, the same one Maxine had placed beside his receipt. Something about it unsettled him. It wasn't the handwriting, elegant but trembling under, or the paper itself. It was the weight of it. He wasn't used to being addressed by people like this, or waitresses, drivers, clerks. People usually smiled, flattered him, and stayed out of his way. But this was different. He picked it up, unfolded it, and began to read. Each line hit harder than the one before. By the time he reached the end, he wasn't hearing the restaurant anymore. He wasn't seeing the people around him. All he saw were faces, employees he had once spoken to in meetings, names he had signed off on during layoffs, workers who had begged for extensions, whose files were marked terminated under his signature. He had always justified it to himself. It's just business. Nothing personal. But now the words on that small slip of paper tore through that wall. He looked around the room, searching for Maxine. There she was, near the corner, refilling another table's glasses, her expression calm, her movements practiced. She didn't even look his way. She wasn't expecting an apology. She wasn't expecting anything. That hit him even harder. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. His chest tight. The food in front of him suddenly felt tasteless. He called for the check, left a generous tip, not out of guilt, but because he didn't know what else to do, and quietly left the restaurant. Outside, the night air felt colder than usual. His driver opened the door, but he didn't step in immediately. Instead, he looked up at the glowing sign of the restaurant and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, Charles Harrington felt small. Not insignificant, but human again. The following morning, Charles Harrington sat in his penthouse office overlooking the skyline. The city glimmered under the morning sun, but he barely noticed. The note from the night before sat unfolded on his mahogany desk. He'd read it at least 20 times, and every time the words hit harder. "You may not remember me, Mr. Harrington, but I remember you." He closed his eyes. Her handwriting still burned in his mind, the shaky pen strokes, the quiet pain behind every letter. Charles had faced shareholders, courtrooms, and critics, but never guilt like this. This wasn't a business problem. This was personal. He opened his laptop and searched his company archives. James Waters. The system pulled up an old employee file, a small photo, employment history, termination date. Just another entry in a long list of cost-saving layoffs from 10 years ago. He scrolled through James's record, a loyal worker, never missed a day, even received performance awards. Then one line stood out. Position eliminated due to restructuring. Charles leaned back, staring at the words as a lump rose in his throat. He remembered that year vividly. His company had been on the verge of bankruptcy, and he'd cut hundreds of jobs to save the business. He'd told himself it was necessary, but looking now, he wondered, what was it really? Or was it just the easy way out? Hours later, Charles found himself standing outside the same restaurant. The smell of coffee and sizzling breakfast filled the air. He wasn't sure what he planned to say, or if Maxine even wanted to see him. When he walked in, heads turned. He wasn't just a man, he was a known name. People recognized him from business magazines and television interviews. But today, he didn't feel like the powerful CEO. He felt like a man trying to make amends. The hostess approached with a polite smile. "Good morning, sir. Table for one?" "Actually," he hesitated. "I was wondering if Maxine Waters is working today." The hostess blinked, a little surprised. "Maxine? I think she's in the back. Let me check." A minute later, Maxine appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. "Mr. Harrington," she said softly. "You came back. Charles stood, unsure how to start. For a man who had given speeches to thousands, words now felt impossible. I read your note, he began, voice trembling slightly. Several times. She nodded silently, waiting. I just wanted to say. He paused. I didn't know what happened to your husband. I'm so sorry, Maxine. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes glistened. Thank you, sir. But it's all right. Life moves on. No, Charles said, shaking his head. It's not all right. I made decisions that affected lives, and I never looked back to see the damage. There was a long silence. The restaurant noise faded into the background. Finally, Maxine spoke, her voice steady but gentle. Mr. Harrington, you don't need to apologize to me. My husband made his peace before he passed. He used to say, forgive those who don't see you, and one day they will. Maybe this is that day. Charles felt his throat tighten. He looked down at the note still in his hand, now creased from being folded so many times. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said quietly, but I need to do something, for him. For you. Maxine shook her head. If you really want to do something, help the people who are still struggling. The ones who lost their jobs, their families, their hope. That would mean more than any apology. Her words struck him like truth itself. For years, his company had measured success in profits and growth, never people. Maybe it was time to change that. He left the restaurant that day with a decision burning inside him. By evening, he called an emergency board meeting. When his executives arrived, they found a different Charles Harrington, not the man of ambition and ego, but one humbled by reflection. We've spent years chasing numbers, he began, but we've forgotten the people who built those numbers. He took a deep breath. Starting today, we're launching the James Waters Foundation, a program to support families affected by corporate downsizing, to provide retraining, scholarships, and financial aid. The room fell silent. Some executives exchanged glances, surprised by the sudden change. Charles didn't care. For once, this wasn't about image or PR. It was about redemption. As the meeting ended, he pulled the note from his coat pocket one last time. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, Thank you, Maxine, for waking me up. 2 weeks later, the world began to take notice. The name James Waters Foundation appeared in newspapers, trending hashtags, and talk shows. Major headlines read, Billionaire CEO launches fund to help laid-off workers. Charles Harrington's surprising move shocks corporate America. But very few people knew the real story behind it, that it all began with a single handwritten note from a waitress named Maxine Waters. Inside the restaurant, life went on as usual. Plates clattered, orders were shouted across the kitchen, and customers filled every booth. Maxine still worked double shifts, still smiled politely at every table, and still slipped tiredly into the bus after closing time. Except now, something was different. When the morning news played a segment about the James Waters Foundation, her coworkers crowded around the small TV near the counter. Hey, Maxine, Carla called. Isn't that the guy from last time? The one you waited on? Maxine turned, wiping her hands on a towel. The camera showed Charles Harrington at a press conference standing before a crowd of journalists. His voice was steady, humble. I created this foundation not as charity, he said, but as a correction. For too long, we've measured success by profit margins, but true success comes from the people who build those profits. This foundation is named after one of them, a man who gave his best and lost everything when we failed to see his worth. The reporters scribbled furiously. One raised her hand. Mr. Harrington, who was James Waters to you? Charles paused for a long moment. Then he said quietly, He was the husband of someone who reminded me what it means to be human again. Maxine froze. The entire staff turned toward her, eyes wide. Wait, is he talking about you? Carla whispered. Maxine didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a cup. A rush of emotions, sadness, disbelief, pride, all swirled together in her chest. Later that evening, as the dinner rush slowed, the restaurant manager approached her with a grin. Maxine, you might want to check your phone, he said. You're kind of famous. She frowned, confused, then pulled out her old smartphone. Her notifications were overflowing. Dozens of messages, calls, and social media tags. Someone had filmed Charles's press conference and posted it online. Within hours, people started searching. Who is Maxine Waters? The waitress who inspired a billionaire. Messages poured in. You're a real-life angel. You didn't just change his life, you changed thousands. Respect to you, ma'am. She scrolled through the comments, tears filling her eyes. She never wanted attention. She never planned to change anyone's life. She just wanted to tell her truth, and quietly, honestly. Meanwhile, at Harrington Enterprises headquarters, the change had already begun. The new foundations team was busy setting up training programs for former employees, building a scholarship fund, and offering small business loans to families in need. Charles insisted on being personally involved. He attended meetings, reviewed applications, and even visited a few families himself. He wasn't the same man anymore. Gone was the arrogance, the detachment. In its place was something softer: humility, gratitude, purpose. During an interview on national TV, a journalist asked him, "Mr. Harrington, people are calling this a redemption arc. Do you agree with that?" Charles smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it's not about redemption for me, it's about awakening. Sometimes it takes losing sight of your own humanity to realize how deeply you've buried it." One woman reminded me of that. A woman who had every reason to hate me but instead chose to forgive. A week later, Charles returned quietly to the restaurant. This time he didn't come in a suit or with a driver. He wore a simple shirt and carried a small envelope in his hand. When Maxine saw him, she gave a faint, surprised smile. "You again?" she teased gently. He laughed. "Yeah, I couldn't stay away forever." He handed her the envelope. "It's not money." "Don't worry," he added quickly. "Just a letter." She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, his handwriting this time. "Dear Maxine, you taught me something no boardroom ever could. That real strength isn't in power or wealth, but in grace. Because of you, thousands will now have hope again. Thank you for your courage, your honesty, and your forgiveness. Sincerely, Charles Harrington." Maxine folded the letter carefully and smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You didn't owe me anything, Mr. Harrington," she said softly, "but I'm glad you found your peace." He nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "You helped me find it." They stood there for a quiet moment, two people from opposite worlds, connected by a single act of truth that changed both their lives forever. By the end of the month, Maxine Waters' life had changed, though she never asked for it. The story of the waitress who humbled a billionaire spread across every social media platform. News anchors debated it, podcasts discussed it, and motivational speakers quoted it. Clips of Charles Harrington's press conference, where he spoke her husband's name with reverence, were replayed millions of times. People everywhere were inspired. Some called it the most human story of the decade. Others said it was a lesson the world needed. But for Maxine, life remained simple. She still worked her shifts, still helped the younger staff, and still took the bus home at night. The only difference was, people recognized her now. Customers smiled warmly. Some even left thank you notes with their tips. One day, as she walked into work, she found a crowd gathered near the door, cameras flashing, microphones ready, reporters. "Ms. Waters? Ms. Waters?" they shouted. "How does it feel to be the woman who changed a billionaire's heart?" Maxine blinked, overwhelmed. "I didn't change anyone's heart," she said modestly. "He changed his own. I just reminded him to look." Her words went viral again. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the James Waters Foundation, Charles Harrington watched the news from his office. He smiled as Maxine's interview played. She hadn't taken credit, and of course she hadn't, that was who she was. His assistant entered with a hesitant knock. "Sir, there's something you should see." She handed him a stack of letters. "These are from people the foundation has helped. Retrained workers, single parents, students. Most of them mention Maxine." Charles flipped through the letters. "I got my first job after 2 years. Thank you. My son's scholarship saved our future. Tell Ms. Waters she gave us hope." He read every single one, his heart swelling with emotion. That evening, he made a decision. A few days later, the restaurant received an unexpected phone call. The manager rushed to Maxine with wide eyes. "Maxine, you need to sit down," he said breathlessly. "The mayor's office just called. You're being honored at the city awards next week." "What?" She laughed in disbelief. "That can't be right. I'm just a waitress." He smiled. "Not anymore, you're not. You're an example." The night of the ceremony arrived. The grand hall sparkled with chandeliers and elegant decor. Cameras flashed as celebrities, politicians, and journalists filled the seats. But all attention turned when Maxine Waters entered, wearing a simple navy blue dress and a look of quiet grace. As she walked to her seat, people stood and clapped. Some even cried. When it was time for her award, the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Tonight, we honor a woman whose courage and compassion sparked a movement, reminding the world that empathy is the greatest power of all. Maxine stepped onto the stage, heart pounding. Charles Harrington himself appeared beside her, holding the award. He handed it to her with a warm smile. "This is yours," he said softly. She looked up at him, her voice trembling slightly. "I never imagined I'd be standing here. Not after everything that happened." Charles nodded. "Neither did I. But sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths." The crowd applauded as Maxine turned to the microphone. "Thank you," she began quietly. The hall fell silent. "I'm not used to speeches. I'm used to serving coffee and clearing tables." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. "But if there's one thing I've learned," she continued, "it's that kindness is never wasted. Even when no one sees it, it matters. My husband James taught me that before he passed. He believed that people are good, even the ones who forget to be. I think he was right." Her voice softened. "I never wanted fame. I just wanted to be heard once. I guess that was enough." The entire hall stood up. Applause thundered, echoing against the marble walls. Cameras captured her tears as she smiled humbly. That night, the clip of her speech exploded online. It was shared millions of times within hours. Maxine Waters began trending across social media. Not the politician, but the waitress. Influencers quoted her line, "Kindness is never wasted, even when no one sees it." Teachers used her story in classrooms. CEOs referenced her in seminars. Her message became more than a moment. It became a movement. Meanwhile, back in her small apartment, Maxine sat on her couch, holding the award. Her cat purred beside her. She smiled softly, looking at the old framed photo of her and James on their wedding day. "Looks like we did it, honey," she whispered. "You're still changing lives." A soft knock came at her door. When she opened it, Charles Harrington stood there. No cameras, no entourage. Just him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought maybe you'd like to share one," he said. She laughed. "You still remember how I like it?" He smiled. 2 sugars, no cream. They sat together, quietly watching the city lights through her window. No words were needed. Both knew that life had come full circle, from tragedy to redemption, from silence to something eternal. Months passed, but the world didn't forget Maxine Waters. Her story, a waitress, a note, a billionaire's awakening, became more than just a headline. It became a symbol of how one small act of truth can ripple across humanity. The James Waters Foundation expanded worldwide. It funded programs for unemployed workers, offered mental health support for struggling families, and partnered with universities to create Humanity and Leadership scholarships, all inspired by Maxine's courage and James's memory. Every event began with the same story. A waitress once handed a billionaire a note. That note changed everything. For Maxine, life was quieter but fuller. She still worked part-time at the restaurant, not because she had to, but because she wanted to stay grounded. She said it reminded her of where she came from and why compassion mattered. Every so often, young people came in asking for pictures. "You're the Maxine Waters, right?" They'd ask shyly. She would smile and reply, "Just Maxine, the lady who served coffee." They always laughed, but they left inspired. One crisp Sunday morning, Charles Harrington visited the Foundation's new community center. The walls were lined with photos, workers, families, students, each one a story of renewal. In the Aswai, main hall hung a plaque that read, "In memory of James Waters, proof that one life can inspire thousands." Charles stood silently before it, hands in his pockets. He thought about how different his life had been a year ago, filled with wealth but empty of meaning. Now it felt the other way around. He turned as Maxine entered the hall, carrying a small box of donated books. "You still can't stop working, can you?" he teased. She smiled. Old habits. They walked together through the center, watching children reading in one corner, volunteers handing out meals in another. The place buzzed with life, hope, compassion, second chances. Charles said quietly, "You know, all of this, wouldn't exist without that note." Maxine shook her head. "Maybe, but that note wouldn't exist without you giving me a reason to write it. I guess we both needed each other to learn something." He nodded slowly. "To see the people behind the numbers." They both smiled. That evening, a journalist covering the foundation asked to interview Maxine one last time. "Ms. Waters," he said, "after everything that's happened, the award, the fame, the global recognition, what's the one thing you'd like people to remember about your story?" Maxine thought for a long moment before answering. "I want people to remember that kindness is power," she said softly. "Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that listens. The kind that sees people when the world looks away. You don't need money or fame to change a life. Just a moment of courage and a little heart." Her words went viral again. People across the world shared them under the tag, "Nar the note that changed everything." A year later, on the anniversary of the foundation's creation, Charles held a ceremony in Maxine's honor. Thousands attended. Workers, families, students, people whose lives her note had touched. He stood on stage and said, "Maxine once showed me that humanity is not lost. It's just waiting for us to notice it again." The crowd rose to its feet, applauding. Maxine smiled from her seat, tears in her eyes, clutching the same worn letter she'd written long ago. The letter that had changed everything. If you believe one voice can spark change, type HOPE in the comments, and tell us what kindness means to you and where you're watching this from.